everyone, Sam from Developing Mathematical Thinking, and in this video I'm going to talk about some different decimal concepts and specifically how to help remedy some common student misconceptions that you'll often see in kind of the 4th, 5th, 6th grade world when kids start working a lot with decimals. So the first thing I want to share with you is something that a lot of teachers see when kids first learn to add or subtract decimals. And we'll do a simple number example. So not making the math too difficult. So adding 8/10 and 4/10. A lot of students, when they first encounter this type of content, will say that the answer is 1200s, or they'll often say decimal 12. And if you ask students why they think that, there's actually some good reasoning that leads to that misconception, because first of all, 8 and 4 has always been 12 for them. And the other piece is they're trying to make sense of what this new symbol that they haven't spent a lot of time learning about, what it actually means. And so they're noticing that, okay, the 8 is after the decimal, the 4 is after the decimal, so the 12 should come after the decimal. So that ends up leading to an incorrect answer, but it does come from some good thinking. Now, the other place that's actually the root of this misconception goes way back to when kids learn whole number place value. And I want to give you an example here with 12 units of 1. Now, when kids are first learning place value, a really common overgeneralization they make is that the number 12 is always 1 unit of 10 and 2 units of 1. So that would look like this. So I have the 1 unit of 10 and then the 2 units of 1. But it's really important when kids are first learning place value with whole numbers to also know that you can represent 12, or you can compose the quantity 12 with 12 units of 1. Now, the way we write it always matches this model, but that's not the way we always deal with that quantity. So that underlying misconception leads into this particular problem, because the sum of 8/10 and 4/10 is actually 12/10, but just like the whole number 12, with 12/10 you've composed a whole unit of 1 with 2/10 left over. So that common misconception starts here, and then it also has a little bit to do with the models that we use to help kids understand decimals. So a really common one is a decimal grid that I'll show you in just a moment, where we basically partition this into 100 grid squares. It's a very helpful tool, but first, and we actually have a few videos that talk about this, the order of models that we want to try to stick with. This is probably not the first model to use for decimals. So what we would suggest doing is starting with the bar model. So we'll say that that's a whole unit of 1. And then we're going to partition that down into 10 smaller units. Now, if you haven't seen any of the fraction videos that we put together, you may want to take a look at some of those, because they're going to highlight how decimals are really just a special case of the larger world of fractions that sort of force what units we deal with to follow our base 10 number system, whereas in fractions you can partition pretty much however you like. So with partitioning down into tenths, if you're watching this with students right now, I'd actually encourage you to pause the video and have them practice trying to partition into tenths just to see what they do, and then I'll show you how to do it. So I'll give you a moment just to pause. Okay, so let me show you a strategy that one of my students, when I was a classroom teacher, showed me to always partition down into tenths. And so what she said was the first thing she liked to do was partition in half. So that gives you 2 units. And then focusing on just that first half, partitioning into 5 smaller units. And she kind of generalized a pretty interesting rule that to make 5 units, you actually only draw 4 partitioning lines. And she also pointed out that that middle unit right there is going to be kind of right in that the half of that new section here. So because there's 5, you're not going to have any perfect partitioning line right at the halfway mark. So then over here, same idea. And by partitioning in half and then partitioning down in 5 and 5, you end up with tenths. So we would actually work with that idea first. Also, we would probably suggest writing them as fractions first. So this would be 1/10 as a fraction, and then connecting that to how we write it as a decimal, with the decimal just being a symbol to tell us, hey, now you're working with units less than 1. So we would start here. Then when we're going to go past 1, we could either extend the bar model out here or move to using a number line, which becomes kind of the same idea as the bar model, but now we're just dealing with one part of it. So going out to 2 in a more linear fashion. Then we can move to the more conventional decimal grid. And a lot of materials will have them pre-made for kids to shade different tenths or hundredths. It's actually really helpful to have them partition on their own the first couple of times. So I want to take what I just showed you here with the bar model and transfer that to the decimal grid, which is an area model. So the first thing we're going to do is partition just to tenths, and then we're going to take it to hundredths. But we're going to do it at the same time with the bar model to show how that length idea really helps kids get an idea of how small a hundredth will be. So first thing I'm going to do, partition in half, just like we did last time. And then I'm going to use that same strategy to get 5 units on this side, and then 5 units on this side. So now I have tenths, just like I did down in my bar model. Now, in the bar model, when we go down to hundredths, it's really helpful to, the first time kids deal with hundredths, to actually take each of these and you can see how small those units start getting. And that really helps kids get a general sense of the proportion and the relationships between those units. So then if we were to keep going, just thinking if we're dealing with it in this bar model, how small something like 1,000th or a 10,000th would be. But now moving to the area model, this gives us a chance now to partition in 2 directions so that we can actually see the units a little more clearly. So what I like to do when we're working with students is actually just focus on 1/10 first. And we're going to partition this way using that same strategy. And then actually extend those partitions all the way across. And the reason why I like starting with just the 1 unit of a tenth to show these 10 hundredths is it really helps reinforce this relationship before we then see the whole grid turn into hundredths. But from there, we can actually do that by just extending those partitions. And now we have hundredths. The other piece that's really nice with this model is when you do get to move past 1, is to actually draw the units of 1 together, like an area, as opposed to 2 separate quantities. And we've talked about this in some other videos that highlight why that type of representation is so helpful. Okay, I hope you found this video useful and get a chance to practice some of these strategies with decimals.